Have you ever considered that the symbol we've come to regard as the embodiment of democracy and freedom might actually be a monument to the greatest falsification in human history? We've been lied to our entire lives about the origin of the Statue of Liberty. History textbooks, guidebooks, official documents, they all repeat the same rehearsed mantra about a gift from France for the centennial of the United States of America's independence. But what if I told you that this colossus of copper and steel physically could not have been built the way it's described to us? What if 19th century engineers attributed to themselves the achievements of a civilization they themselves helped erase from the face of the earth? Prepare yourselves, because today we will dismantle the foundation of official history, and there will be no turning back. Look closely at this monument. Cast aside the romantic fluff about international friendship and look at the facts through the eyes of an engineer, a metallurgist, and a logistics specialist. Before us is a structure 93 meters high, with a total weight of 254 tons. The official version states that the framework for this colossal lady was designed by none other than Gustave Eiffel, the very creator of the famous tower in Paris. Sounds convincing, right? A brand, a name, an authority. But let's dig deeper to where the devil hides, into the details of the manufacturing process and metallurgy of that era. They try to convince us that in the 1880s, when the metallurgical industry was just beginning to transition from artisanal production to industrial scales, engineers easily created a highly complex load-bearing framework capable of withstanding colossal wind loads in New York Harbor. But here's the first inconvenient fact that makes historians' eyes twitch. It concerns the steel and wrought iron itself. To create such a framework, more than just ore was needed. A technology for mass, uninterrupted production of steel of uniform quality was required. Recall what the Bessemer process and open hearth furnaces are. In the 70s and 80s of the 19th century, these technologies were capricious, expensive, and far from ubiquitous. Steel was a material for elite products, for weapons, for tools, but not for pouring thousands of tons of it into the frameworks of statues supposedly given away for free. An analysis of archival data on steel production in France during that period reveals strange anomalies. The production volumes do not correspond to the stated scale of construction, which was carried out simultaneously on both sides of the Atlantic. Where did this metal come from? Where were those giant factories capable of casting and rolling such beams with perfect geometry? We are shown black and white photographs where mustachioed men in bowler hats pose against individual fragments. But have you ever noticed that these photos almost never show the actual process of assembling the load-bearing nodes in real time? We see already finished pieces lying on the ground, or an already assembled structure within scaffolding. Where are the intermediate stages? Where is the photographic evidence of how these multi-ton beams were lifted to height without hydraulic cranes, using only primitive winches and hemp ropes? Imagine the physics of the process. Lifting a beam weighing several tons to a height of 50 meters in strong winds from the bay, using wooden scaffolding and manual labor. This is a deadly attraction that should have claimed the lives of hundreds of workers. But in the reports, silence. No mass tragedies, no technical failures. Everything went smoothly, as if they were assembling a plastic construction toy, not erecting a megalithic metal structure. And here we come to the main question that makes us doubt the dating. What if the framework wasn't built at the end of the 19th century? What if Gustave Eiffel and sculptor Bartholdi didn't create the statue from scratch, but were engaged in something entirely different? Look at the structure of the framework itself. It's not just a support. It's a complex engineering grid that suspiciously resembles technologies we only began to rediscover in the mid-20th century. The principle of a curtain wall, where the outer shell carries no load but hangs on an internal core, became standard for skyscraper construction much later. How did they figure this out back when brick and stone were still the primary building materials for tall buildings? There is a version that explains all these inconsistencies with one terrifying blow of truth. The Statue of Liberty is not a 19th century novelty. It is a refaced, restored object from a much older era. An era when working with metal and gigantic structures was commonplace, not a feat. 19th century engineers did not invent steel where it couldn't have existed. They found it. They discovered a framework that survived a catastrophe that destroyed a past civilization. And their task was not to build, but to disguise. To clad an ancient skeleton with copper sheets, give it the appearance of an ancient goddess, and pass it off as an achievement of modern industry. You might ask, why such an elaborate lie? The answer is simple and cynical. To conceal the very existence of technologies that surpassed steam engines and coal furnaces. To admit that this framework stood here long before the arrival of the first colonists would mean to nullify all official chronology. It would mean admitting that we live on the ruins of a great world that was erased. And the Statue of Liberty is not a symbol of a new light, but a tombstone of the old. But the framework is only the tip of the iceberg. Let's look lower, at what this statue stands on. The granite pedestal, and even more importantly, Fort Wood, which has the shape of an 11-pointed star. Do you really believe that such a complex geometric form was created to defend the harbor against wooden ships? Star-shaped fortresses are scattered all over the world, and their orientation, their structure, speak of a completely different purpose. This is not fortification. This is energy. And the Statue of Liberty, standing in the center of this star, with a torch raised to the sky, looks more like a technical device, a resonator or a transmitter, than a monument. Let's set aside poetry and pick up a calculator, because numbers are the most merciless enemy of official history. We are told that the Statue of Liberty was a gift from the French people to the United States of America. It sounds noble, but let's look at the economic context of that time. France had just suffered a humiliating defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871. The country was devastated. Its economy lay in ruins. Paris had endured a bloody commune, and a gigantic indemnity, which had to be paid to Germany, hung around the state's neck. And at this moment of total national crisis and destitution, the French suddenly find colossal funds to cast hundreds of tons of copper and steel, pay for the labor of hundreds of highly skilled engineers and workers, rent ships, and send a giant monument across the ocean? This is economic absurdity. No penny-by-penny public collections, which tour guides love to talk about, could have covered expenses of such a scale. We are talking about millions of francs in the currency of the time. It's like a country experiencing default and civil war today, suddenly deciding to build and gift a space station to a neighboring continent. Logic suggests that there was no construction from scratch. There was only an operation to legalize an already existing object, which indeed required money, but in much smaller amounts, for restoration, transportation of individual decorative elements, and a large-scale PR campaign. Now let's move to the technical side of the issue, specifically the pedestal. Have you ever wondered what this lady actually stands on? Official data states that the concrete foundation of the statue weighs 27,000 tons. Dwell on that figure. 27,000 tons of concrete. We are told that it was the most massive concrete monolith created at that time. But allow me to ask, how? In the 1880s, there were no truck-mounted concrete mixers, no automated concrete plants with computer-controlled mixes. Concrete was mixed almost by hand or with primitive steam engines. To pour such a volume of monolith without cold joints which would inevitably lead to the destruction of the structure under the statue's weight, requires a continuous supply of mix 24 hours a day for many months. Where was the logistics for supplying sand, gravel, and cement? In New York Harbor? On an island? Where everything had to be delivered by barges? This is a logistical nightmare that even today would be an incredibly complex task. And back then? Archives are silent about a flotilla of barges that should have been continuously shuttling between the island and the mainland. There are no invoices for the purchase of such volumes of cement. Where did it come from? Perhaps this concrete monolith is not a 19th century construction at all, but an ancient foundation whose quality so far surpasses modern concrete grades that it was simply decided to use it as a ready-made base? Let's go further. The copper skin. The thickness of the copper sheets is only 2.4 millimeters. We are told that 301 copper sheets were hand-hammered using the repoussé method. Masters allegedly hammered the sheets, shaping them according to wooden templates. Imagine the volume of work. 31 tons of copper rolled into thin sheets, which then had to be perfectly fitted to each other at a height of 90 meters. Any error in geometry of a millimeter at the bottom would lead to seam discrepancies of meters at the top. This requires mathematical precision, unattainable by the manual by-eye method. Furthermore, the copper and the iron framework form a galvanic couple. Upon contact in a salty marine environment, they should have destroyed each other through corrosion within a couple of decades. Engineers supposedly foresaw this and laid insulating gaskets made of asbestos impregnated with shellac. Do you believe that in the 19th century, workers could manually insulate thousands of contact points so perfectly that the statue stood for almost 100 years without major framework repairs until the 1980s? This is impossible. Manual insulation of such a scale would inevitably fail, and the statue should have collapsed from framework corrosion even before World War I. But it stood. And here another demographic and social aspect emerges. Who built it? New York at that time was a city of migrants, cheap, unskilled labor. Irish, Italians, fleeing hunger and poverty. These were manual laborers, ready to dig ditches, but not engineers of the highest caliber, capable of working with such precision at height. Where are these thousands of highly skilled specialists? Their names are not in history. We know the name Eiffel, the name Bartholdi, but we do not know the names of foremen, brigadiers, section chiefs. And yet, this should have been the elite of the engineering corps. Why are they silent about them? Because they weren't there. Official history also omits the oddities of transportation. The statue was allegedly disassembled in Paris, packed into 214 crates, and sent on the frigate Isère. But if you look at the blueprints of the holds of ships from that era and compare them with the volume of crates needed to transport such curved, voluminous parts, you will find that they simply would not have fit without serious deformation. Transporting thin, hammered copper in wooden crates across a stormy Atlantic is madness. Half the cargo would have turned into scrap metal. It is much more logical to assume that no one transported anything. The object stood in place. It was simply rediscovered. Let's talk about what this colossus holds in its hand. The torch. We are officially told that the Statue of Liberty was the world's first electrified lighthouse. Ponder that phrase. 1886. The age of electricity is just beginning. Thomas Edison had just launched his first power station on Pearl Street, which barely served a few blocks of lower Manhattan, constantly breaking down and overheating. And suddenly, in the middle of the water, on a remote island, a powerful electric beam lights up, visible for tens of kilometers. Official technical documentation of that time is a collection of fairy tales for the naive. We are told that power was supplied via an underwater cable. In 1886? The technologies for insulating underwater high-voltage cables at that time were in their infancy. Seawater, a salty, aggressive environment, constant mechanical stress from currents. Any electrical engineer will tell you that such a cable, laid with late 19th century technology, would have turned into a short circuit within a week. But the torch burned, and it burned so brightly that it terrified local residents. Accounts from ship captains and port authorities survive, complaining that the statue's light was unearthly and blinding. It was not like the warm glow of incandescent lamps or even the harsh light of arc lamps of the time. It was a cold, piercing luminescence that behaved strangely. It did not scatter in fog the way ordinary light does. Birds flying past fell dead by the thousands, as if struck by invisible radiation, rather than simply hitting an obstacle. Official science attributed this to brightness. But what if the torch isn't a light bulb? There is a theory, supported by material analysis, that the original torch, which, incidentally, was replaced in 1986 and now stands in a museum so no one can study it in working condition, was not a lighting device at all. It was an atmospheric condenser, a device for collecting free electricity from the ether, a technology that Nikola Tesla so desperately tried to revive. The statue itself is a giant antenna. Look at its construction. A copper shell, an ideal conductor, insulated from the ground by a granite pedestal with an iron core inside. This is a classic resonator circuit. The authorities of the 19th century did not build this generator. They found it. And their main problem was that they didn't know how to turn it off or how to control it. The very electrification of '86 was not about connecting the statue to the grid, but an attempt to suppress it, to seize control, and to pass off the operation of an ancient device as an achievement of modern science. They inserted their primitive light bulbs inside a highly complex technological node to conceal the true glow of ionized air around the top. This is precisely why the original torch was so damaged by corrosion and required replacement. It simply burned out from overloads, operating in a mode that our engineers couldn't even comprehend. Now look at the statue's face. The official legend states that sculptor Bartholdi was inspired by his mother's face. Seriously? Have you seen portraits of his mother? It's a completely different type. The statue's face has severe, sharp, almost masculine features. A broad jaw, a straight Greek nose, a powerful neck. This is not the face of a woman embodying freedom. It is the face of an ancient god. And we have a specific suspect, the sun god, Helios or Apollo. Compare the statue to ancient depictions of the Colossus of Rhodes. The same radiate crown on the head, the same 7 rays. Officially, we are told that the 7 rays symbolize the 7 seas and 7 continents. But this is a lie, invented retrospectively. In ancient tradition, rays around the head are a sign of a solar deity, controlling the energy of the heavens. The engineers of the past knew what they were doing. This statue was a technical structure dedicated to energy, the sun, and light in a physical, not metaphorical sense. And here we come to another inconsistency that historians carefully avoid. The spiral staircase inside. A double helix. Have you ever tried to climb it? It's a narrow, uncomfortable, claustrophobic space. We are told it was made for tourists. But why design a tourist attraction so that 2 people can barely pass each other? The answer is simple. It's not a staircase for people. A double helix is a shape perfectly suited for transmitting wave oscillations. In engineering, it's called a waveguide. The steps were added later. barbarically cut into a structure that was originally intended for the passage of an energy flow, not for school excursions. The entire internal ergonomics of the statue screams that it is not intended for biological organisms to be inside it. There is no ventilation, it was cut in later. There is monstrous, maddening acoustics. There are constant vibrations and strong winds that induce panic in a person. It is a machine, a giant machine clad in copper. But the most terrifying discovery awaits us if we compare the construction dates with global demographic collapses. We are approaching a topic that explains where the ready-made framework came from, and why the population of America in the mid-19th century behaved so strangely, as if settling empty ghost cities. Have you ever examined panoramic photos of late 19th century New York with a magnifying glass? Do it, and a chilling cold will grip you. In photographs dated to the years of the Statue of Liberty's construction, we see a ghost town. Wide avenues, monumental stone and brick buildings, ready-made infrastructure that is no less complex than modern day. But the streets are empty. We are told that this is the effect of long exposures of old cameras. Supposedly, people moved too quickly and the film couldn't capture them. This is a lie for amateurs. Any photographer will tell you that even with a 5-minute exposure, a moving crowd leaves ghostly traces, blurred silhouettes, a milkiness in the shot. But in these frames, the pavements are clean, like an operating table. There are no horses, no carriages, no merchants, no hustle and bustle typical of a metropolis. The city stands completely ready, but dead. And in the midst of this silence, on an island, the great construction of the century is supposedly underway. Who needs it? Who is carrying it out if the city is empty? Let's turn to dry statistics and demographics, which cannot be falsified as easily as history textbooks. In 1880, the population of New York was just over 1 million people. Now compare this with the volume of residential and industrial buildings that already stood at that time. Engineering calculations of sewage capacity, water supply systems, and street layouts showed that the city was designed and built with a reserve for 5 to 7 million inhabitants. What insane investor in the 19th century would pour billions into infrastructure for a population that doesn't yet exist? Who builds collectors several meters in diameter for a city with a majority supposedly lives in wooden shacks? The answer is terrifying. This city was not built by them. Those whom we call first settlers and builders arrived to find everything ready. They were not architects, but looters and squatters, occupying empty stone jungles left by a previous civilization. This is where the mystery of the Statue of Liberty's impossible framework lies. It was part of this original complex. The new masters of life simply unearthed and restored what survived after a global cataclysm. Look at the engravings of those years. Everywhere, mountains of dirt, clay, buried first floors of buildings, the so-called cultural layer, which for some reason covers windows and doors. All of New York was being excavated, and the statue, most likely, was also being tidied up, with layers of sediment and oxides being removed from it. And now for the most terrifying part, the people. Where did the builders of these giants disappear to? The demographic pyramids of the mid-19th century in the USA show monstrous gaps. A huge shortage of adult male population, officially attributed to the Civil War. But war losses, even by the most inflated estimates, do not cover the deficit of skilled labor that should have arisen. We have millions of children, foundlings, who were massively distributed to farms and factories, but we lack a generation of master fathers. This looks like a classic post-apocalyptic scenario. A catastrophe occurred. Let's call it the Great Reset, or the Flood. The term is not important. The fact is. which wiped out the adult population or forced them to abandon the cities. Children and ruins remained. And the new power, the elite, who came to these lands, began the process of appropriating history. They needed to explain to the survivors and newly arrived migrants where these magnificent buildings and this giant statue came from. Thus, the legend of brilliant engineers and the gift from France was born. They urgently needed to invent technologies retrospectively. How did we build it? Well, we forged it by hand, and the concrete? Mixed it with shovels. The bolder the lie, the easier it is believed. The Statue of Liberty became a symbol of the new power's legitimization over the old world. It was as if it said, "We are the masters here. We built this." Although in reality, they just painted the facade of someone else's palace. Pay attention to old photos of the statue's unveiling. The crowd of people below looks like ants against the backdrop of a spaceship. Their clothing, their transportation, their technologies sharply contrast with the quality of the monument itself. This is a dissonance of developmental levels. The technological gap between the creators of the statue and those who came to the unveiling is hundreds of years. We see a civilization of carriages and steam boilers standing at the feet of a civilization of electricity and composite materials. Moreover, look at the official cornerstone laying ceremony in 1884. This was not a state event in the usual sense. The ritual was led by William Brodie, Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of New York. This is a historical fact that is not even hidden, but also not advertised. Why was a national symbol handled by a secretive, semi-religious organization with its own rituals and secrets? Because they were not building a monument to democracy. They were consecrating the return of control over an ancient object. The plaque on the pedestal still states that the cornerstone was laid by Freemasons. This is their seal, a mark of ownership, which tells us, you only see the shell. We own the essence. And one more detail that troubles realist researchers. Rivets. The statue's construction used about 300,000 rivets. In the 19th century, this was hellish manual labor. Each rivet had to be heated red-hot, inserted, and then hammered to form a head. This meant noise, fumes, burns, and months of work. Where are the memoirs of these workers? Where are the letters home? Dear Mary, today I riveted the 30th sheet on the giant's leg. The archives are empty. No personal diaries, no recollections of ordinary guys who supposedly erected this marvel. This silence is louder than any explosion. It means one thing. Either the workers didn't exist at all, or the process was so automated, or secret, that no witnesses were left. Furthermore, there's a purely physiological aspect that shatters the entire official narrative. Working with hot rivets inside a hollow metal statue, which, in the summer sun, heats up like an oven, guarantees disability for any person. Deafness from constant banging in an enclosed space, heat stroke, metal fume fever from heating. Reports from New York hospitals of that time should have recorded a sharp increase in workers seeking treatment for characteristic occupational injuries. Where are the lawsuits against construction companies? Where are the union strikes, which were gaining momentum at the time? They are absent. The city's medical and legal statistics are absolutely sterile. This is another indirect but damning piece of evidence that either a completely different, silent and cold metal joining technology was used, like molecular welding, now lost, or this object always stood there, and hired actors merely simulated intense activity for newspaper reporters, hammering on already finished monolithic seams. And what about those smaller copies of the statue standing in Paris? We are told they were trial runs, before creating the original. But logic suggests the opposite. These were attempts at reverse engineering, a 19th century cargo cult. Eiffel's engineers tried to copy the found technology, creating smaller models to understand the principle of atmospheric electricity or structural stability, but they only produced lifeless statues. They managed to reproduce the form, but not the content. The original in New York is a working machine. The copies in Paris are just scrap metal, an attempt to imitate gods whose technologies were lost.